Hi, my name is Noor, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about what you can do in high school to prepare for college level classes. Now, I just finished my first semester of college, and coming out of high school, I think the first thing that I would have loved to have learned was more about how to learn on my own. A lot of the times in high school, my teachers would write notes with me, and my teachers would walk me down through everything that I needed to know for the exam. So, right before my test, I would just study my notes and I was fine. But I noticed in college, for the first time ever, I've had lecturers who have a flipped classroom style and they actually don't teach in lecture at all. They just answer questions. So I was relying completely on my textbook to learn, and that to me was completely new because I didn't know how to go through the textbook quickly and I didn't know how to retain all the information that I was learning. So in high school, my piece of advice for you would be to use the textbooks that your teachers give you. And yes, you definitely have a textbook somewhere. I would open that textbook and practice learning all the material in that book, maybe before you go to class or after class, and see if all the pieces of information that you're able to take out of your chapter align with the notes that you took in class. That way you can practice learning yourself the way that your teacher teaches you, so that in college, if ever your lecturer isn't going to lecture and expects you to learn the material from the book, you're ready for that and you know how to succeed in that type of environment. My second piece of advice is to learn adjusting to different classes. So, what I mean by that is in high school, I used to use pretty much the same method of learning for every single course I would take. So, I would just take notes, I would do the homework, and then before the exam, I'd look at my notes and my homework. But in college, I've realized that I become a lot more efficient when I change the way I learn to different classes. And this is also extremely helpful when every professor has a different way of teaching and your classes are switching every semester or every trimester and they're going really fast. So you need to learn to adapt to the way that your professor is going to teach the content. So, for example, where this might come of benefit in college is if you're taking a biology class and your professor is teaching it for the first time, they might not have a lot of homework ready for students, and they might be using exams that are very similar to the questions that they put on the review. So, for a class where you don't have homework, there isn't a lot of practice exams, and it's just very test heavy, for that, I would suggest learning the material by drawing visuals and really trying to connect the notes to something that'll stick in your brain long term because there isn't a lot of material to reinforce what you're learning in class. But in a course like math, in college, I've seen a lot of lecturers will do one or two examples on the board and not really give you any notes and expect you to be able to build upon that. So for a class like math, you should know that you're going to have to do a lot of practice problems on the basics before you can get to the harder questions. And you should be able to do that pretty quickly because I've had classes where I had to jump from learning one example to doing the hardest question on the homework. So you need to learn to do examples and use that as your primary method of learning instead of the traditional note taking style that your teacher might have done with you in high school. And my third piece of advice, this one's a big one for me, is learning to work with others well. In high school, when I would work with others, I often found myself getting really distracted, and I knew that that really threw me off. So if you can learn how you work with others best, that's going to really set you up for a good college career. For me, I knew that if I worked in groups that were bigger than 2 to 3, I was just not going to be able to focus at all. And I also knew in which settings I was going to be able to focus. So I knew libraries were good and I knew cafes were good, but a lot of the times I didn't like the places that got louder than that. So if there's any sort of setting where you feel like you like the bustling noises around you, you like to be in busy spaces when you're studying, you can study in a park or a setting like that, then it's good to have that in mind when you go into college. And if you have to be in a very quiet, no talking space, then it's also good to have that in mind and communicate with that with your group. And then on that same note, I would say in college, collaborating with others is definitely a lot more important than it is in high school. Not just considering the group projects, but also sometimes in college, the homework can be a lot more complex than what you did in the class. So having a classmate there to work with it with you, and just to be able to reinforce your knowledge by teaching it to someone else and hearing whatever the teacher had said that maybe you didn't hear. That can be another great way of learning, and it also makes your doing your homework a lot more fun. And then on top of that, a lot of your professors might have office hours in times where you have other classes, and email might just not be very efficient because you're going back and forth. So in college, it's a lot harder to access your professor outside of class. So having study buddies who you're going to work well with, that's really going to help set you up for success. So just to reiterate, my first tip was to learn by yourself. My second tip was to learn how you can adapt to different class settings. And my third tip was to learn how you work best with others.